An incident took place in Gaza that resulted in the tragic death of World Central Kitchen employees as they fulfilled their vital mission of bringing food to people in need.
The victims of yesterday's strike join a record number of humanitarian workers who've been killed in this particular conflict. These people are heroes. They have to be protected.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has taken responsibility for the death of 7 aid workers who were accidentally killed during Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. The workers were part of the celebrity chef Jose Andres' charity group, World Kitchen. Meanwhile, Iran has vowed revenge for Israel after Iran has accused Israel of bombing its embassy complex in Syria. It comes as the U.S. is considering providing additional aid to Israel. Now, pressure within Israel and around the world on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is continuing to mount. Joining me now with the latest is The Hill's White House reporter Brett Samuels. Brett, how has the White House been reacting to these quickly moving developments in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, well, sort of a range of developments with Israel to deal with. As far as the strike that killed humanitarian workers, White House officials telling me that they're deeply troubled by this, that they are calling on Israel to investigate how exactly this happened. As Secretary Blinken said, this is not the first time humanitarian workers have been killed during this conflict between Israel and Hamas, particularly humanitarian workers in Gaza trying to deliver aid to Palestinians. So this is just sort of another point of concern, I think, for critics of the Biden administration, that they are not holding Israel more accountable. And now, as far as the strike in Iran goes, the White House telling me that they had nothing to do with this. They were not aware of this beforehand. So, certainly there should be some ripple effects that the White House and others will be keeping an eye on, but no direct White House involvement in that incident.
President Biden has said that, or has considered, according to your reporting, that there would be strings attached, so to speak, to the aid for Israel coming from Capitol Hill, and that there might be a way to utilize that aid to pressure Prime Minister Netanyahu in terms of doing more to prevent the tragedies that we've seen just happen with the World Kitchen. Are these developments going to impact at all the conversation on providing more aid for Israel on Capitol Hill and with President Biden?
Yeah, I think this is certainly just going to embolden the loud voices that we've heard. Senator Bernie Sanders, for example, who have really called on the Biden administration to, essentially withhold aid until Israel makes changes, until they are more accountable, until they limit these civilian and humanitarian worker deaths. Now, we've seen President Biden and Vice President Harris even sort of float the idea of potentially conditioning aid on Israel's behavior. I don't think that he will go quite that far just yet. We've seen reports that the administration actually just approved a fresh round of weapons for Israel. So, I think we're still sort of a couple steps away from the White House following through on that. But I would expect we'll hear folks like Bernie Sanders and other critics of Israel really speak up even louder after this.
What are your sources telling you about how the events of the last 24 hours have impacted President Biden's relationship with Netanyahu?
I think it's fair to say it makes a cool relationship even colder, potentially. We haven't heard that the president and the prime minister have spoken in the aftermath of this World Central Kitchen incident in Gaza, but certainly if they do, that will be worth watching. Their most recent call was very icy, from what White House officials told me. President Biden has really made no secret that he disagrees with Prime Minister Netanyahu on some aspects. He said just a few weeks ago that the prime minister was hurting Israel more than he was helping Israel with how he's handling this conflict. So certainly that's a tense relationship that I think will only get more fractious as events like this continue to happen.
So earlier this year, we heard from some leaders, most notably Chuck Schumer, the leader of the Senate, come out and say that there should be new elections with regards to Israel as it relates to a loss in trust of Prime Minister Netanyahu. In the last 72 hours, we've seen tens of thousands of Israelis come to protest against Netanyahu, including some of the families of the hostages. Will President Biden at some point join Schumer, who was criticized for his calls? Is that something that's on the table that the president is considering?
I'd be surprised if we saw President Biden go as far as we saw Senator Schumer go when he, openly called for new elections. That certainly drew blowback from conservatives and from Israeli officials who felt like Senator Schumer was sort of meddling in their politics. And the White House has said that that's for the Israeli people to decide as far as their leaders go. Now, President Biden did praise that Schumer speech when he said that. He called it a good speech, but he didn't want to go any farther. I think President Biden knows that he would be creating a real mess for himself and for Israel if he were to call for Netanyahu to step down or to call for new elections. So I'd be surprised if we see President Biden go as far as we saw.
And just sticking with the Middle East, I mean, what have your sources told you about how the military community, as well as the commander-in-chief, with regards to that attack at the Syria-Iran outpost? I mean, how has that put on alert the U.S. bases in the region?
Yeah, certainly. So, the White House has made clear that, U.S. forces in that region have already been sort of facing a barrage of attacks in recent months that has only escalated in the aftermath of the October 7th attacks in Israel, which of course sparked off this war between Israel and Hamas. So certainly White House officials telling me that they're going to be on high alert for this, and it'll be something for them to continually watch as this conflict potentially ripples throughout the region.
And the war in the Middle East is also coming as lawmakers are trying to get something for Ukraine. So where does Ukraine funding stand now? And will it be lumped at all to this conversation about Israel aid?
It's a great question. That's kind of what everyone is watching for when lawmakers return next week from their recess. Speaker Mike Johnson has said that he is, working on this path to get Ukraine aid through the House. But, he can't do that without Democratic support, it seems. At the same time, some conservatives like Marjorie Taylor Greene have sort of dangled this potential that they would move to vacate the chair and remove Mike Johnson as speaker if he were to go through with this, or if he were to do it without passing border reforms as well. So Mike Johnson is really caught between a rock and a hard place here. Now, he has said that he's going to push forward with Ukraine aid, but how he does it remains to be seen. And whether it's able to get through the Senate then, if it's just standalone Ukraine aid, is a whole separate question. So all eyes will be on Mike Johnson when the House returns in the coming days.
Switching gears now, Trump posting bond, and there's another gag order on one of his court cases that's been extended. I mean, give us the latest report from the Trump court docket.
Absolutely. A busy sort of wave of events here as far as the Trump legal process goes. He obviously posted the money that was required for his bond in the fraud case, $175 million in New York, which he said he would do after it was reduced significantly by judges there. And in addition to that, as you mentioned, this gag order was originally put in place sort of narrowly so that Trump in this New York hush money case was not allowed to speak about jurors, potential witnesses, but that order was expanded by the judge in the case to include the judge's family members, as well as the family members of the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, after Trump noticeably really went after the judge's daughter specifically, really attacking her, naming her in Truth Social posts. That really drew blowback from critics, from watchdogs who felt like this was a case of intimidation and sort of really attacking a judge's family who's overseeing this case. So whether Trump complies with it, that remains to be seen. He's certainly a bit of a loose cannon on social media and elsewhere. But, that's sort of the latest expansion of this gag order as we approach the start of this trial on April 15th.
All right, we got some primaries today. Primary day in America, right? Connecticut, New York, Rhode Island, Wisconsin, big battleground state, Wisconsin. No surprises expected, but anything we should be paying attention to as the results trickle in and we get some more data from the voters?
Yeah, it's easy to forget, I think, that these primaries are still happening because a lot of attention is pivoted to the expected general election matchup between Trump and Biden. But certainly still worth watching, especially in a state like Wisconsin, as you mentioned. The level of the protest vote against President Biden, certainly he's dealt with that in other states. This sort of uncommitted or protest vote over his handling of the war between Israel and Hamas. So that bears watching, how enthusiastic that protest vote is against Biden. And similarly for former President Trump, how many votes does Nikki Haley garner, even though she dropped out of the race several weeks ago? Are Republican voters still kind of voicing some discontent with Trump as their choice of nominee? Are they still going to vote for Nikki Haley to send a message, even though she's dropped out of the race completely?
Well, RFK, meanwhile, RFK Jr., he's qualified for the ballot in North Carolina. I mean, that's not good news for President Biden. What are the Biden re-election campaign? What are they doing in order to get out the vote, I guess, in terms of dealing with RFK Jr.?
Right. RFK Jr. is sort of the looming cloud over this re-election campaign for President Biden. There's a Quinnipiac poll that showed President Biden narrowly leading former President Trump at the national level. But when you factored in RFK Jr. and other third-party candidates, Trump actually flipped to take a 1 percentage point lead. So that just kind of underscores the risks here for Biden with RFK Jr. as he continues to gain ballot access in now about 5 states. But the Biden campaign has told me, that they are aware of this. They're aware that this is a potential problem for them. They're setting up, more active, more aggressive operations to go after RFK Jr. So I'd expect certainly in the coming weeks and months, if he continues to gain ballot access, especially, that we'll hear more from Democrats, more from Biden allies to highlight his controversial positions, to highlight, support that RFK Jr. has drawn in from Republicans and conservatives. So certainly, Biden folks are aware that this could be an issue for them, and they're preparing to take it a little more head on than we've seen in the past.
I mean, it's interesting, though, because a huge reason why he's qualifying for the ballot in a state like North Carolina is because of his support of those controversial positions that neither party has spoken to or adopted in their platforms. And now one could make the case that that's a good thing. But in this case, I'm not sure that either party wants certain positions as a part of that coalition. Is a fascinating development that we are going to be carefully watching here at the Hill. Another guy that we haven't spoken about in a while, though, is George Santos. Word on the street up in New York is that he's running as an independent. What do we know?
George Santos, he never goes long without finding his name back in the headlines. So he announced that he's going to leave the Republican Party. He's going to run as an independent. He said he's going to run in New York's 1st congressional district, and that's against a candidate who sort of led the push, the Republican candidate who led the push there to expel him as lawmaker. So this is, you could say there's some revenge maybe motivating this for George Santos, maybe some effort to stay in the spotlight as he faces his own legal troubles. But, just another sign that George Santos is not going anywhere, even though he was booted from the House. So we'll see him potentially on the ballot in November running against the very Republican who pushed back against him and then sought to expel him from the House.
Kate Martell was at the Hill, or at the Hill's. Kate Martell was at the White House for the Easter egg roll. Were you?
I was comfortably indoors, avoiding the rain on Monday morning.
I mean, an egg roll goes on whether or not rain or shine. Okay, the Easter Bunny doesn't have any qualms for the weather. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. So no, you missed the Easter roll. Yeah. Easter egg roll? Is it called a roll? Am I adding the word roll? Easter egg hunt? Am I getting it wrong?
It is the Easter egg roll. It is the Easter egg roll. These kids, they hit the eggs with a little stick to roll it along the White House lawn.
Got it. Okay, I was right. Just checking. And by the way, the candy's all on sale now. I was at the pharmacy the other night, and I got all that candy. I'm going to leave it there. Brett Samuels, the Hill's White House reporter, who did not attend the annual Easter egg roll at the White House. Come on, that's the perk of the job. Between that and the Thanksgiving turkeys, I'll let you go, Brett. Great work as always, buddy.
Thanks, Kevin.
A federal judge in California ruled against Hunter Biden's attempt to toss out his tax charges. It means that the criminal case against the president's son will move forward. Hunter Biden faces 3 felony charges and 6 misdemeanor charges in connection to tax evasion, filing a false return, and failing to pay taxes between 2016 and 2019. The Florida Supreme Court upheld the state's 15-week abortion ban on Monday, but a second decision handed down Monday means that the fight over abortion is not over in Florida. The first of the 2 decisions ruled that the state's constitution's rights to privacy does not include abortion. That decision clears the way for a separate 6-week abortion ban that will go into effect on May 1st. In the meantime, a second decision from the same court approved a ballot measure that would turn the issue of abortion access over to voters this November. If it passes, it would roll back the abortion ban to the point of viability, about 24 weeks. The American Egg Board is responding after anger on social media over the White House Easter egg roll decorating contest Monday. The contest rules included a ban on questionable content, religious symbols or themes, and partisan political statements. GOP lawmakers were quick to push back, calling the policy appalling and insulting and saying it was a new policy President Biden implemented this year. The American Egg Board clarified ahead of the Easter egg roll Monday that this was not a new policy and has been in place for decades. The pushback comes after more outrage from Republican leaders over the weekend after the president recognized Trans Day of Visibility, which happened, emphasis on happened to fall on Easter this year. At least one person in Texas has been diagnosed with the H5N1 bird flu after working with dairy cows who also are presumed to be infected with the disease. Officials investigating the outbreak say the risk to the general public is low, but the announcement is certainly worrying as the virus has infected 11 herds across 4 states. The H5N1 bird flu has already affected millions of birds and sea mammals worldwide. The CDC is working with state health department officials to monitor other workers who may have been in contact with infected animals and urged people to avoid raw milk or other potentially contaminated materials. This is the second case of H5N1 bird flu detected in humans. The first was in 2022. And that's it for today's Daily Debrief. My name is Kevin Cirilli. Be sure to come on back and like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.